Hi class and happy Friday and welcome to chapter 4. In chapter 4 we talk about activity-based costing. I'm not going to go through all of the slides for the chapter. I just want to point out a few things and do some examples. I don't want this to be a waste of your time. I want it to be useful to you. So we use two systems to track the total cost of products and services. And those systems, and mostly it's just an indirect cost that has two systems: the job order costing system and the process costing system. We did job order costing in chapter 2, and chapter 3 is process costing, which we're not going to cover. We're going to skip right into chapter 4, which is ABC, or activity-based costing. So as a review, when we worked in the earlier chapters, we assigned indirect costs, the overhead, the MOH, in a volume-based costing system. We assigned it by first determining the cost driver, that allocation base. What did we determine the company used to drive that overhead cost? And then we calculated the predetermined overhead rate, and then we assigned it to our jobs based on the use of that driver. And if we want to compute a unit manufacturing cost, we just do the same thing, only we do it on a per unit basis instead of in total. So that's just a quick review of what we did. It would look like this: per unit, direct materials, direct labor, manufacturing overhead, and the total manufacturing cost per unit. So we could have figured out the total cost for the period and divided by the number of units to get the per unit. If we take that total manufacturing cost and we subtract it from the sales price, we get a gross margin for each product. This is an important term: gross margin. So that only takes into account what it costs to manufacture it. You still have all the other costs below your gross margin, your selling and administrative costs and all of that stuff. So gross margin is total sales price, or the unit sales price, minus the unit manufacturing cost. In activity-based costing, so in prior chapters, we took our total overhead and we divided by one driver. We made the assumption that one thing drove the cost of overhead. For instance, direct labor hours or direct labor dollars. ABC looks at it a different way. And just so you get the big picture, this chapter on activity-based costing only addresses that MOH, the manufacturing overhead part. DM and DL are the same no matter what we use. Direct materials and direct labor are what they are. We don't allocate them, so there's no different methods to allocating them. But this entire chapter is based on allocation of overhead only. So don't get lost in these problems, and when they ask you for total overhead or total manufacturing costs, don't forget to add direct materials and direct labor into it. So ABC costing. We take all of our overhead costs and we put them in a pool. So we have all this estimated cost. In ABC, instead of just one pool, we split it into different pools, making the assumption that there's certain areas or activities that has one driver, and another activity that has a different driver, and another activity that has an even different driver. And not all products will use all three activities. So we do a two-stage process. Let's do a couple of examples here. So we're going to do M410. So this is out of your textbook. Oops, I don't want that one, sorry. I want this one. So we're going to go to M410. And this is actually in your textbook, so you can open your textbook and work along with me if you want. We've got Lakeside Manufacturing that has 4 lines of remote control boats. And they use ABC costing, activity-based costing, to calculate their product costs. We're asked to compute the activity rates for each of the following activity pools, and that's stage 1. That's stage 1 allocation. So they've taken all their overhead costs, estimated them, and then split them into 3 different areas. So they're saying we have overhead in machining, and this is our estimated cost, and those costs are driven by the number of machine hours. We have overhead for setup, and those costs are estimated at $69,825. And those costs are driven by the number of batches we do. Quality control. We've taken all the overhead costs related to quality control, added them together, and come up with $108,800. We're saying that those costs are driven by the number of inspections we do. So we have 3 different overhead costs with 3 different drivers. So we're asked to compute the activity rates for each of those. So machining. It's the same way we computed our predetermined overhead rate. We take estimated amount, estimated overhead, divided by estimated driver, cost driver. So for machining, our estimated overhead is $366,600. And the estimated number of drivers, in this case it's machine hours, is 13,000. So 366,600 divided by 13,000 is $28, because these are dollars and these are hours, is $28.20 per machine hour. And when you're writing down these calculations, be sure to label everything. It will save you a lot of time in the end. For the setup, we're going to, again, take the total estimated overhead of $69,825. We're going to divide by the driver, which are batches, so $69,000, divided by the number of batches, 350 batches, and that equals $199.50 per batch. Again, don't skip writing down per what, because it will help. The third one is quality control, QC. Total estimated overhead, $108,800, divided by the driver, which in this case is inspections, 800 inspections. The driver, or the base, you can call it, and that way you remember what side of the equation it goes on. That's $136 per inspection. So when we want to assign overhead in these areas, if the product uses 15 machine hours, we're going to take 15 machine hours times 2820. If you do 4 batches, you're going to take 4 times $199.50 per batch. If it takes 3 inspections, we're going to take $136 times 3. So stage 1 is computing the activity rates. Stage 2, we use the same information, except we're saying speedy boat. So we're now on M411. Speedy boat requires 2,500 machine hours, 100 batches, and 300 inspections. use the activity rates we just calculated to determine the amount of overhead assigned to Speedy. So Speedy has machine hours, so that was actually machining. So we're going to call that machining. And the rate is what we calculated earlier, 2820 times 2820. Oops, let's not write it like that. That'll just be confusing in the end. So for machining, the rate is 2820. And actual use of machine hours for Speedy was 2,500. And so the MOH for Speedy is 2820 times 2,500, or 70,500. It also has 100 batches, which is setup. So in setups, the rate we calculated for setups was $199.50 per batch, because batches were the driver. $199.50, and let's put dollar signs by these so we don't get confused, times the actual use of that driver, 100 batches, equals $19,950. They also had 300 inspections. That's quality control. So QC, and we determined that QC was 136 per inspection. 136 times 300 inspections is 40,800. So all of this together is MOH. This is what we assign. So if we add it all up, it adds up to 250, not 500. $250. That's the total overhead assigned to Speedy. And to get total manufacturing costs, you would still have to add direct materials and direct labor. This is just the overhead. Okay, let's look at the next one. So refer to that information we just did and do the same thing for luxury. But this is set up a little bit differently. It says, suppose the luxury boat requires 4680 in machine hours, 70 batches, and 208 inspections. Using activity proportions, determine the amount of overhead assigned to the luxury product line. Okay, M4-12. So we use proportions. So what we're saying when they say to use activity proportions, we're figuring out what proportion of the total overhead does this one use. So if it uses 4,680 machine hours, and we have a total of 13,000 machine hours, that means 4680 divided by 13,000 is 36%. So it uses 36% of the overhead. So 36% times the total overhead, 366,600, equals 131,976. And yes, you could do it a different way, but you might come up with slightly different answers because of rounding. In this one, I think you can come up with the same answer doing it this way versus activity proportions. But in some of the problems that you will be doing for homework, the activity proportions come up with a slightly different number. So be sure you do what it says. So this was machining. And now we need to do setup. So let's see. 70 batches. So this one requires 70 batches. And our total amount of batches is 350. So 350. That's 20%. 70 divided by 350. And my fives are really bad today. I apologize. So that's 20%. Times the total cost. It's 20% of the total cost going to whichever one this one is. Luxury boat? Yes, luxury boat. So 20% times 69,825. And that gives you a total of 13,965 for setup. And for quality control, luxury requires 208 inspections. So QC has a total of 800 inspections. So 208 inspections divided by 800 inspections is 26%. Times the total cost of 108,800. So 26% of the quality control QC costs go to the luxury boat. That's 28,288. And then if you add all of those up, that's your total applied MOH. 174,229. Sorry. So what you want to think about here is we could have assigned this using one driver, but you can see that QC, quality control, for one is a lot more than quality control for the other. So we want to be more accurate. The bottom line is ABC costing gives you a more accurate picture of your costs. Okay? So now we'll do a problem where we're calculating the traditional overhead rates, the way we did it in chapter 2. So Bluefield Corporation has two product lines, A and B. They have this information about its overhead and potential cost drivers. So the total overhead is 112,500. The total number of labor hours are 2,500 and machine hours are 59,800. We don't know, they didn't tell us which one is a better cost driver. What they told us is they use a traditional costing system with labor hours as the cost driver or the allocation base. So this would be the base. So we're asked to determine the amount of overhead assigned to each product line if product A uses 70% of the labor hours and product B requires 30%. Okay, so this is E4-7, number 1. So product A, they're saying that product A requires 70% of the labor hours, and they use labor hours as a cost driver. So we can then just take the 112,500 times 70%, because we know the 70% is going to go to product A. 112,500 times 70%. That gives us $78,750 to product A. Product B uses the remaining 30%. So 112,500 times 30%. So all we're doing is just allocating based on a percentage. That's 33,750. And if we add those together, they better add up to 112,500, right? Because 70% is here and 30% is here. Okay. Requirement 2 says they use traditional costing system with machine hours as the driver. And product A consumes 2,210 machine hours and B consumes 3,700 and 700 hours. So we're going to look at it a different way here. So what we'll do is say product A and product B. Let's figure out our predetermined overhead rate. That would be the total estimated cost, 112,500, divided by the total estimated machine hours of 59,800. Oops, sorry. I didn't realize I was off the screen. So predetermined overhead rate, $112,500 divided by 59,800 machine hours. That's rounded $1.88 per machine hour. And be careful with rounding. A lot of these problems, you'll get rounding errors if you're not careful. Use standard rounding. Okay, so product A uses 22,100 machine hours times $1.88. You'll get 41,548 rounded. Product B consumes 37,700 times the $1.88, and you get 70,876. And if you add those together, it's not going to add up to exactly 112,500 because of the rounding involved in the $1.88. And if you do the division on this and you don't take it out of your calculator, it's going to carry all of the decimal points behind the scene and make an even bigger difference. So be careful. So that's standard. That's what we've been doing. Calculate the predetermined overhead rate and apply it, either one way or another, either as a percentage or per hour, per cost driver unit, whatever that unit may be. So now we're going to look at the same information for the same company that we just did, and we're going to do it as ABC costing. So they've taken their total costs and they've split it up into two areas: total overhead costs, materials handling, and machine maintenance. The cost drivers for materials handling is the number of material moves. The cost drivers for machine maintenance is the number of machine hours. First, we're asked to calculate the activity rate for each cost pool. So this is E4-8 for each cost pool. So materials handling is 90,000 divided by 500, or $180 per move, because it was the number of moves drives the materials handling cost. And then maintenance $22,500 total cost divided by the number of machine hours, 59,800. And that gives us 0.3763 per machine hour. All right. So we computed the activity rate for each cost pool. And then we have to determine the amount of overhead assigned to the product A and product B if they use this number. Okay. So product A. Material. Product A uses 200 material moves. So 200 moves times $180 per move. Oops. My brain got ahead of my fingers. $180 per move. So that's $36,000. Oops. One too many zeros. Okay. Maintenance for product A. Maintenance, product A uses machine hours, so because this is per machine hour, 22,100 machine hours times 0.3763 per machine hour. That gives us $8,316.23. Total, $44,316.23. There's some rounding things going on there, so don't get too hung up on that. All right, what about product B? Product B, material. Product B has 300 material moves. 300 moves times $180 is $54,000. Maintenance. Product B has $37,700 in machine hours, and it was 0.3763 per machine hour. That gives us $14,186.51 for a total of $68,186.51. So that's assigning it under ABC. So if we look back at regular costing, product A, if we use, what was this one? Product A requirement 1 was labor hours as a cost driver. So if we look back at this, we can say if we use labor hours as a cost driver, this is how much goes to product A, and this is how much goes to product B. If we use machine hours as a cost driver, this is how much goes to product A, and this is how much goes to product B. If we split it up and do it separately with ABC costing, it looks very different. Product A uses a lot less than product B altogether. Okay, that's ABC costing. And remember, this is just the MOH. This is applied MOH. You still have to add in direct labor and direct materials. So there's still 3 costs. One last example. Let's do this. Sorry, I was having technical difficulties, and I didn't want to waste your time with you watching me fumble around. So now we're going to do the same thing, only we're going to do it for a service company. This works just as well and is used maybe even more frequently in a service company. This is an accounting service. So basic tax services and rent-a-controller accounting services. They've identified 3 activity cost pools: transportation, electronic processing, and office support, and the associated drivers with the expected usage for tax and expected usage for controller. Okay? So the total estimated usage for transportation cost is $5,000 plus $35,000. 5 of it goes to tax, 35 to controller. The same for each one of these. We're asked to compute the activity cost rate of each of these activity cost pools. So M4-13, let's do transportation first. Total estimated activity, 50,000, divided by the total estimated use of 5,000. Let me make this a little clearer. Divided by 5,000 plus 35,000. So the total usage. And that gives us $1.25 per mile, because the driver is mileage. Okay. Electronic processing. Total cost, 75,000, divided by 20,000 hours plus 30,000 hours, because the driver is processing hours. That gives us $1.50 per processing hour. Office support. Total cost of $20,000 divided by 3,500 hours. 3,500 plus 1,500 hours equals $4 per administrative hour. Because we said that office support overhead is driven by the number of administrative hours put in. And the total is these two together. So we've come up with rates. M4-14 asks us to allocate the rates and figure out a cost assigned to one of our tax clients, Barry Gold. So Barry Gold had some work done, and we need to bill him. So we need to know the amount of overhead to assign to his account. We can't wait until the end of the year because we want him to pay his bill now. So we need to allocate some overhead. So for Barry Gold, the transportation requires 20 miles of transportation. So that's 20 miles times $1.25 per mile. So that makes $25. Electronic processing uses 50 hours of processing time times $1.50 per hour. That gives us $75. And office support used 3 hours of office support times $4 per hour. And that would be $12. For a total overhead cost assigned of $112. Overhead, not MOH, but just overhead. So this is applied overhead. So then we would charge for direct materials as well. Any materials that were used. We would also charge for direct labor. Whatever tax person worked on it, that direct labor would be applied to their bill, plus this piece of overhead. Okay? And we can do the same thing using activity proportions. This was using rates. This is using proportions. So this says using the activity rates. This says use the proportions. Determine the amount of overhead using activity proportions. So if you remember right, proportions is where we just take the amount this company or this person used divided by the total and get a percent. So transportation oops, let me relabel this. M4-15. Transportation. Total cost of transportation, or total usage of transportation, $35,000. Let me just clarify here. So I'm going to back up because I realized that I was misleading you. What we want to do here is figure out the controller services, the amount that gets assigned to controller services for overhead. So for transportation, the controller services uses 35,000 total miles, expected to use 35,000 total miles, divided by the total 35,000 plus 5,000, or 87.5%. So transportation is going to use 87.5% of the costs. Let's do this. So let's say $87.5% times $50,000 equals $43,750. And that makes sense that the controller services would use a lot of transportation because they actually called it rent-a-controller. So the controller has to travel to the client. All right, what about electronic processing? Controller services uses 30,000 hours, because this is the controller services column. So 30,000 hours divided by 30,000 plus 20,000, the total. So we get a percentage, 60%. So 60% times the total cost of 75,000 equals 45,000. total cost for electronic processing. Now let's do the same thing for office support. Controller services uses 1,500 hours divided by 1,500 plus 3,500. So divided by the total gives us a percentage of 30%. 30% times the total cost of 20,000 equals $6,000. If we add up these three costs, the 45,000, the 6,000, the 45,000, and the 43,750, so this would be our applied overhead of 94,750. Out of our total overhead amount, the amount that's used by transportation is 94,750. Okay, so that's all I have for you on ABC costing. You can see it can become pretty complex pretty quickly. When you write these things down, just be sure to label everything. If you label it, you'll make less mistakes. If you have questions, post them in the discussion, and don't wait till the last minute to post them in the discussion. I'm an old lady and I go to bed early, so I don't see those posts until the next day, which is too late to help you if you post late at night on the night they're due. All right, have a good week.